Welcome back to Sunday Morning Cafe, our ongoing conversation about building and maintaining resilience. This week, our thoughts will revolve around the concept of resilient relationships. Have you heard this question lately? At the end of the pandemic, will we see more pregnancies or more divorces? And I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know that anybody does, but this I do know. There's something about this pandemic that not only puts pressure on us individually such that those fault lines and fissures in our personalities kind of get pushed on. The same's true for our relationships. And maybe you're experiencing that in your marriage or your partnership. Something that good longitudinal marital research tells us is that in every marriage, there's one, maybe two, and can't even be three problems that will never fully resolve. Hopefully, over the years, what we learn how to do is to approach those problems that won't ever go away with ever more humor, ever more grace, ever more patience, such that that problem that never goes away ends up being a catalyst for growth in each one of the partners along the way. But something that is experienced while sheltering in place and being limited to the same house with the same person is that some of those perpetual problems that we live with seem like they get bigger. Let me put that a different way. When we study good marriages and we study bad marriages over time, we find that in every good marriage, people will tend to pull into the foreground that good thing about their spouse. They see in the fuzzy background those negative things, but it's in the fuzzy background. If that marriage begins to go poorly, then out of the background comes from the fuzzy background comes the negative things into the foreground, and into the background go those positive things. So just the inverse happens. What I found in people who are, and not just me, but in the research on couples that take that turn toward divorce, in addition to pulling those things into the foreground that were in the background that were negative, they begin to look back over stories from their past and restory those stories with the negative thing in the foreground. So for instance, I go on my honeymoon with my wife to Venezuela, before all the problems in Venezuela. It was a gift for our honeymoon. We went there. And while I was there, I had to try the street food, and as a result, eventually, I was sick to my stomach for a couple days. When our marriage is going well, my wife might say, that's just some of Tom's adventurousness. That's why I got attracted to him. If our marriage goes south and we get in that downward spiral, that same story could end up with my wife saying, could Tom be bothered to listen to people say, don't eat the street food in Venezuela? No. You know what he did? And you know what happened in my honeymoon? I had to have that guy in the bathroom with those sounds and those smells. So that's what happens. So what's true of a marriage when it goes south is also true, come to find out, in a pandemic. Those things can move into the foreground that are negative, and those positive things can be lost sight of. I want to offer just a couple of suggestions to you if this has shown up in your relationship. One of those things is simply this. You'd think with all this extra time, people would spend time with each other just visiting. But I found in my practice that's not always happening. Maybe it's because there's more child care needs. Maybe it's because there's a need to be an at-home schooling person. But for whatever reason, a distance can set in where people are not taking that time. I found out the hard way in my practice. If I just jump in and try to do conflict resolution with people when they come for marital counseling, I don't get too far unless I start reducing the distance between the two of them. When I reduce that distance, they begin remembering why it was that they entered into friendship to start with. And then resolving those conflicts is much easier. So one clear suggestion is that you would take some time with your spouse to have a cup of coffee, a glass of wine, sit on the porch with each other, stay up after the kids are asleep and have your date for an hour and a half. That's one suggestion. A second suggestion goes with what I said about that question of lenses. What's in the foreground, what's in the background? My second suggestion has to do with taking custody of your mind and your imagination. In spirituality, in real estate, they say there's three laws: location, location, location. In spirituality, there's three laws. Spirituality begins in gratitude, it ends in gratitude, and in the middle, there's gratitude, which is another way of saying appreciation, which is another way of saying savoring. So sometime every day, can you carve out space to simply look back on the last 24 hours on something about your spouse that you can appreciate? It could be a favor they did to you. It could be a personality characteristic that you noticed yet again, that you just take time to savor, to appreciate. In another one of these videos, I talked about the importance of doing beauty checks for resilience. In marriages, the same thing. To notice what's good and beautiful in your spouse and worth appreciating in your spouse, park your mind on it. In fact, you could set a timer on your phone to go off at the same time every day where you just simply savor your spouse. And while we're on the topic of spirituality, one more thing you could fold into your day is just a prayer that you can utter that goes like this. Increase my love for, and put your spouse's name in there. Maybe utter that prayer a few times a day, 10 times a day if you want to. See what happens. You ever heard it said, a theologian once told me this, the least wrong thing we can say about God is that God is love. So what's the chance that a prayer like that's not going to get answered? Increase my love for. So that's the end of our conversation for today. We'll see how that experiment, any of those experiments go this week. And I'll see you next week for more conversation on what builds resilience in our lives and in our relationships. See you then.